Are you aware of the World Climate Declaration? There is no climate emergency. It's signed by now over 1,800 global scientists, professionals.
There is no climate emergency? It was.
Are you aware of that declaration?
I'm not aware of that one. I assume I'm aware, familiar.
I entered in the record. I'd recommend you read it. I thought one of the...
Without objection, it will be entered into the record.
Well, I already did it, but we'll enter into this one too. I thought one of the interesting statements in there is the obvious that CO2 is plant food. If you want a green planet, you need some CO2. But anyway, you ought to take a look at that. You know, by the way, I'm not a climate change denier. I'm just not a climate change alarmist like you and the chairman. I would call myself a climate change realist. I don't know about you guys, but I think climate change is, as Lord Monkton said, okay? And by the way, it is. I'm kind of getting back to Senator Kennedy's point is there's nothing we can do about this other than adapt. Another witness claimed that we've spent about $5 trillion. And this is before the Inflation Reduction Act, which, by the way, isn't $400 billion worth of tax credit. Goldman Sachs says about $1.2 trillion. So that's about $6 trillion we've already spent combating climate change. The question I have for you, has all that spending done anything to impact climate change? $5 to $6 trillion already spent?
But undoubtedly it has.
Where's the proof?
Well,
I mean, you're here before the committee again. You know, we've had 16, 17 hearings now. Again, climate change alarmism. You know, we're going to destroy our planet. It's not going to keep lasting. Got to do something now. We've been doing $6 trillion worth. I haven't heard any reduction in the alarmism here whatsoever.
Well, I mean, you describe yourself, I think, as a climate realist. But it sounds to me more like you're a climate fatalist, that there's really nothing that can be done. The focus of the hearing today, of course, is on the big oil industry's attempts to obscure the problem for many decades and then to undermine any potential solutions. In 2019, we called a hearing in House Oversight on what the oil and gas companies knew about climate change and when they knew it. Industry scientists and experts testified that the companies knew the burning of fossil fuels caused climate change as early as 1959, the year the first Barbie doll appeared in the United States, the year that Alaska and Hawaii were admitted to the Union. By the 1960s, before Neil Armstrong even walked on the moon, the science of global warming was well understood by big oil. Instead of telling the world about the perils of global warming and changing their business model, the companies deliberately suppressed relevant scientific findings for decades and then challenged and dismissed urgent calls by scientists to take climate change seriously. Instead of acting like Paul Revere and sounding the alarm about climate change, they acted like Maleficent, the evil fairy, in Sleeping Beauty and cursed everyone to try to go to sleep for 100 years. As the experts told us, big oil's pattern of lying and cover-up set the country back decades in our ability to seriously address the problem. For 3 years, the House Oversight Committee has investigated big oil's 6 decades of climate deception. On September 16, 2021, we sent investigative letters to Exxon, BP, Shell, Chevron, the American Petroleum Institute, and the Chamber of Commerce. Just yesterday, with your committee, we released our final report. Our investigation uncovered compelling evidence of aggressive industry deceit, which continued long after big oil gave up on its outright climate denialism. The joint report and documents we discovered show how time and again the biggest oil and gas companies have talked a good game for purposes of public consumption, but have acted in a completely reckless way to protect their long-term profits in the carbon industry. Company officials admit the terrifying reality of their business model behind closed doors, but always manage to say something deceptive, false, and soothing to the public about climate change. Our investigation reveals big oil's denial, disinformation, and doublespeak, all to lull the public into complacency about the enormous climate emergency we are in and the role that big oil has played in bringing it about. We learned the fossil fuel companies made public pledges to support the Paris Agreement and achieve net zero emissions while internally recognizing that their actual practices would never allow them to achieve these goals. We found the company's PR tactics mutated from simply denying climate science to spreading disinformation about the safety of natural gas and engaging in propaganda about their commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We learned they publicly broadcast and advertised their interest in low-carbon technologies like carbon capture and algae-based biofuels, while internally acknowledging that these pie-in-the-sky technologies are expensive, difficult to scale, and simply not ready for commercial development. We consistently found that the oil and gas companies relied on trade associations like the American Petroleum Institute and the Chamber of Commerce to spread misleading narratives to the public and to lobby politically against effective climate solutions that they pretended to favor. We found they pumped $700 million into universities and academic research programs to influence pro-natural gas studies and findings over renewable energy solutions. The companies paid lip service to global environmental goals, but dismissed them as basically meaningless behind the scenes. BP's website states that it supports the goals of the 2015 Paris Accord, but our investigation uncovered an email revealing that BP trivialized the Paris Agreement, stating that, quote, "No one is committed to anything other than to stay in the game. So instead of BP choosing to take the actual steps needed to reduce its vast contribution to carbon pollution, BP is instead, quote, staying in the game of fossil fuels and carbon pollution." Spinning a fairy tale about their commitment to renewable energy, fossil fuel companies have often advertised their commitment to low-carbon technologies, like Exxon's vaunted algae biofuels program. From 2009 to 2023, Exxon spent nearly half as much on advertising algae as a climate solution as it spent on actually researching and developing it. Our investigation revealed that Exxon's own employees raised concerns that the company's beautiful ads might mistakenly imply that, quote, the technology is live today. But it was never live, and indeed Exxon ended up pulling up stakes on the whole project before it ever produced any energy. When you compare the actual investments in low-carbon technologies to the company's overall expenditures, you see exactly what kind of priority this really is. Shell, for example, spent just 11% of its total capital expenditures on lower carbon technologies, and Exxon and Chevron spent even less, at 6% and 4% respectively. We learned all of these damning facts despite the company setting up huge roadblocks to our investigation. In response to the committee's initial letters in 2021, the companies only provided trivial and publicly available documents, so we sent them subpoenas. And even after being subpoenaed, the companies continued to block our investigation. They heavily redacted or withheld entire documents based on erroneous privilege claims. More than 4,000 documents came back to us substantially redacted. They also used a paper blizzard tactic by producing hundreds of thousands of generic and non-responsive documents. Of the more than 280,000 produced, more than 125,000, nearly half, were mass emails, newsletters, and other fluff documents. If the companies had actually complied in good faith, who knows what else we might have discovered. Fossil fuel companies publicly claim to be partners, if not leaders, in fashioning climate solutions, but our investigation exposed that as a fraud. Big oil is not addressing the climate crisis, but profiting from it and using a lot of its mammoth resources on continuing campaigns to insulate its carbon-based business model. For more than a half century, they have suppressed the truth about how carbon emissions destabilize the climate and what we need to do to protect ourselves from calamity. The era of denial and deceit must come to an end. Thank you for your attention, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, I yield back.
In your testimony, you say, my watery home state of Maryland with more than 7,100 miles of coastline is strikingly vulnerable to the effects of climate change and the rising sea level. So that's one of the biggest alarms of the climate change, folks, is that the sea level will rise and just wipe out coastlines, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So are you aware of how much the sea level has risen in the Bay of San Francisco since the last glaciation period of, some 12 to 20,000 years ago, which is just a blink of the eye in geologic time. Do you know how much the sea level has risen in the Bay of San Francisco in that time period?
I do not know that one.
You want to just take a guess?
No, because I'm not guessing very well today, so no.
It's 390 feet. Do you think there's anything mankind could have done to prevent that level sea level rise of 390 feet? Just, again, 20,000 years.
Well,
You think there's something we could do about that?
no.
Okay, good. That's the answer. No, there's nothing we could do about that. Are you aware of the Vostok ice core samples?
I'm sorry?
The Vostok ice core samples. Okay, this is the most famous analysis over 440,000 years. Shows five very distinct cycles. Do you know what the temperature variation of those cycles was?
The seasonally, you mean, or you mean over time?
No, over geologic time, 440,000 years.
Oh, well, there's been ice ages, and I'm sure it's dramatic.
Again, do you know what the temperature variation revealed in those things is?
Please share.
22.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And oh, by the way, and they didn't really talk about this, but CO2 ended up being a lagging indicator to temperature, which would imply that as the globe warms, all the CO2, most of it's locked up in the ocean, gets unlocked, and so it's temperature that causes CO2 to rise as opposed to the exact opposite. Again, it's one of the orbital forcing. There's all kinds of other theories about this. What I'm saying is it's not settled science. So why are we projecting spending trillions of dollars to impact something that we really, in the end, can't change? That's my point.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the claim that the science is uncertain is itself a lagging indicator. I mean, we heard that for decades from big oil, that we just couldn't know, that there's a study on this side, there's a study on that side. I think the overwhelming weight of scientific evidence.
Yeah, no, I realize that.
The overwhelming weight of scientific evidence is on the conclusion that man-made causes are behind climate change.
Check out these 800 scientists led by two Nobel Prize winners in physics. Check out their World Climate Declaration. There is no climate emergency.
I will definitely check that out, and I'll get back to you on it. I mean, again, and this is difficult for those of us who are not scientists, because all that we can do, or at least all we can reasonably do, is depend on the scientific authorities that are part of our government and that are part of the United Nations and that are rendering the conclusions that we can count on. But I'm very happy to read any kind of dissenting views. I really am.